Last week we started covering the evidence for evolution and the various different things that are listed in a biology textbook, for instance, that show why evolution occurred and what proves evolution. And we're going to continue with that today. So, as I said, what are the evidences of evolution? Well, some of these we covered all of these last time. Things, comparative anatomy, in other words, the structural similarities between animals and man, comparative physiology, how things function, comparative genomics, when you get into the gene and you look at the DNA, sequencing, we went through that. And embryology, we talked about that. And remember, no one's believed this for the last 150 years, but still it pops up in texts and also, as I said, pops up in trying to defend abortions. And vestigial organs. List of vestigial organs now is 0. We also talked about junk DNA, which is kind of not a vestigial organ, but certainly is thought to be vestigial information, but now with more research they're finding that it's not vestigial at all, and you need everything that, you need all the DNA you've got, in other words. So in continuing on with that, we're going to talk about 3 other evidences. The first being geographical distribution, and in other words, certain kinds of plants and animals, they vary in their character, and depending upon their geographical location in which they're found. Now, one of the classic studies of this is, of course, Darwin and his finches on the Galapagos Islands. And, of course, he wrote Origin of Species based on a lot of that information. And he showed that the size and the shapes of the beaks of the finches varied, and it seemed to vary with their diet. And came up with survival of the fittest based on that. And remember that the finches couldn't go island to island because they were too far away, so they were geographically isolated. And but keep in mind, this does not even suggest evolution, certainly doesn't prove it. And from a creation standpoint, all that's being shown here is genetic variation within the animal itself, and genetic variation which was designed by God into those birds. That's all it shows. If individuals of a particular species are isolated geographically, the genes are limited then only to those individuals that have been isolated. And they're fixed to some degree, and therefore there's going to be variation when you jump around to different geographical locations if there's not intermixing between those types of species. So how those animals appear is restricted to the genetic variation that they have. Taxonomically, they may be, when biologists look at this, they may be classified as different species. They may be classified as different subspecies because of this genetic variation, but that does not make them, that does not prove evolution. A good example of that are macaque monkeys. This is the genus Macaca. These are 4 of the animals in Macaca. This is a rhesus monkey, this is the rhesus monkey here. This is a cynomolgus. This is the pigtail, and the Japanese macaque is down here in the corner. All of these animals are geographically isolated. This one is in Indonesia, this one's in Asia, that one's in the Philippines, that one's in Japan. So they're all geographically isolated. If you take these animals, they all, by the way, have been classified as different, the same genus, different species. But if you take these different animals, you can interbreed them all. In other words, there's There's no problem. Chromosome numbers are the same. These animals are all the same genus. They all interbreed. And this is not because of evolution. The changes are not because of evolution. They're just simply genetic variation. These animals are isolated from each other and they don't intermix. But if you take them into the laboratory and crossbreed them, there's no problem at all. They'll have offspring. Another thing that's talked about a lot in evolution are breeding experiments. Now, new varieties of plants and animals can be developed. You have varieties of corn, of course. You have breeds of horses, breeds of dogs. Keep in mind, with any of these breeding experiments, that intelligence is involved. Obviously, man is directing the breeding of these various different corn, horses, dogs. Man came up with all that, so intelligence is involved right away. So man makes a selection here, but again, species don't change here, and there's a huge variation in one of the examples of that are breeds of dogs. I mean, you sit here and look at this, and you've got this little Chihuahua down here and a Great Dane here. I mean, there's huge variation here. Same genus and species. You could artificially breed these two animals, and they would have offspring. So, you can. I say artificially because there's such a huge difference in size here, obviously. But on the other hand, I mean, these are the same genus and species. Everybody agrees. Everyone agrees with that. But again, there's wide genetic variation, and because of the selection by man of different traits, in other words, the Great Dane obviously they were breeding it for its size. And there's the bottom line here is there's never, ever a change in kind here. Now, the last subject we'll talk about, and we'll talk about this for the rest of the time, is the study of fossils, paleontology. This is where everything kind of comes together. First off, how are fossils formed? Well, they're formed primarily during a flood. And everyone pretty much agrees with that most fossils are formed during the time of a flood. You need rapid burial of the animal, and I'll talk about animals here. Plants obviously can be fossils too, but I'll just limit my comments to animals here. But you need rapid burial of the animal in mud to get a fossil. You hit a deer with a car out on Highway 52, and that deer's on the side, it's not going to become a fossil. I mean, it's just not happening, and we all can understand that. The scavengers are going to come and take that animal away. And the rapid burial has to occur prior to the animal decomposing. And it eventually will turn into sedimentary rock, which will contain the animal, and that will be a fossil. Now, one of the things to think about here is we have dinosaurs that are fossils. It takes a huge amount of sediment to bury a Diplodocus, for instance, which is a huge dinosaur. Could look in that window standing on the ground. I mean, it takes a huge amount of sediment. So think about that in the type of flood that would have to occur to bury some of these animals. But dinosaurs are being dug up all over the world. Well, fossils are the only historical record that we really have in the layers of sedimentary rock. And do these fossils and what we see in the sedimentary rock, does it line up with creation or does it line up with evolution? Well, you can make various different assumptions without knowing anything about the sedimentary rock of what would happen or what you would see within that. So if you take creation, there would be a sudden appearance of highly complex forms. There's nothing leading up to it. But evolution, you'd expect a gradual change of simple forms into complex forms. That's what evolution is all about. Under creation also, when you find characteristics, they'd be complete in the fossil record when first seen. In other words, there wouldn't be transitional forms. Evolution, however, you'd see a transitional series linking all these categories and leading up to a particular system or a particular organ. And then in creation, you would see gaps in the fossil record, and in evolution, you shouldn't see these gaps. So those are the kind of the things you kind of go into this with those things in mind. So what does the fossil record support? Creation, evolution. Now I'm not going to talk about all of the fossil record here. We'd be here way longer than the 35 minutes I've got left here, but I'll pick out some different areas. There's what's called the Cambrian explosion. In other words, there are no metazoans. Metazoans are animals that have tissues and organs in Precambrian rock. That means the strata that is below Cambrian rock. But if you go to Cambrian rock, you find all major complex invertebrates. Sponges, for instance, jellyfish. And these invertebrates have complex systems. They're not just simple one-celled animals or multi-cell animals. Nope, they've got complex systems already involved, as you can see with this picture of a jellyfish here. Now, they all of a sudden just suddenly appear in the fossil record. There are no simpler forms, in other words, leading up to these complex invertebrates. So, sudden complexity is seen. A quotation there, it says, you have between 20 and 35 completely novel body plans that come online in the Cambrian. You have a huge jump in complexity. You see things that are complex all of a sudden. It's sudden, and you have no transitional intermediates. Well, if you look at the chart, what does that support? It supports creation. It doesn't support evolution at all. Another quotation. Consequently, the Cambrian explosion provides not just a negative case against Darwinian evolution, but also a compelling positive argument for design, in other words, for creation. There's a gap here between the Precambrian and Cambrian of 1 billion years. 1 billion years in the evolutionary, in what the evolutionists feel, how long it would take to lead up to those complex invertebrates. So the Cambrian explosion is definite evidence for creation, not evolution in any way. Concerning fossil fish, and I'll just have a few quotations here. Between the Cambrian, when vertebrates probably originated, and the Ordovian, when animals with fish-like characteristics appeared, there is a gap of perhaps 100 million years. Again, gaps. Gaps means creation. There shouldn't be any gaps in the record if evolution was true. And not only that the gap is 100 million years, but he also goes on to say, which we will probably never be able to fill. And that is true. They never will be able to fill it because there aren't any transitional forms. How about cartilaginous fish, the evolution of cartilaginous fish? This is a good one. We find a series of wildly impossible types, which do not fit into any proper pattern. That's because God created them that way. It would have simplified the situation if they had never existed. About lungfishes. The lungfishes, like every other major group of fishes, have their origins firmly based in nothing. By the way, the quotations that I gave you are all from people who believe in evolution, all of them. The crossopterygian. Crossopterygian is a fish, but it's the fish that evolutionists will point to that is the transition between fish and amphibians, and of course the amphibians come out of the water and start living on land. And according to evolution, this gill-breathing fish evolved into an air-breathing. In other words, you go from a gill-breathing fish that has no lungs to air-breathing amphibian that does have lungs. So you would expect a lot of changes that you would see in the fossil record leading up to that first amphibian. This supposedly occurred, according to evolution, 350 to about 400 million years ago, long time ago. This group of fish was, the crossopterygians were thought to be extinct for 70 million years, which is about the time the dinosaurs went extinct, until a coelacanth, which is a crossopterygian, in 1938 was caught in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Madagascar. They pulled this fish into the boat, knew that they had something, and something that they had not seen before. It's this fish here and this one here. And they took these live fish and they thought, we've got a living fossil here. They thought that this thing had been extinct for 70 million years. All of a sudden, somebody pulls one into the boat. There's been several caught since that time, by the way. But this live fish was compared to the fossils of the same species. No difference. Fish is the same. The tissue that they thought and proposed that was changing from a gill breather into lungs, they took a look at it and it was not lung tissue at all, it was fat. So this would be a huge embarrassment, you would think, to the evolutionary theory and the evolutionists who believe in it. But how did they deal with this? Well, as it's stated there, they were amazed that the coelacanth, which is the crossopterygian that was caught, which is they termed as a living fossil, was able to remain genetically and morphologically stable for over 400 million years. That one was stable. Where another crossopterygian, which now they've identified, this is a fossil, by the way, because it's extinct. So this is it's a reproduction, artist reproduction of what that Tiktaalik looked like. But this Tiktaalik supposedly, which is another crossopterygian, evolved all the way through amphibians, and then of course went to reptiles, that went to mammals, and that went all the way up to us, humans, all the way up to man. So where we have one of these animals that has a very fixed genetic, but its close relative evolves all the way to man. Hard to believe. Kind of leaving the fish and thinking about flight, it had to evolve independently 4 times. Just don't think of a bird here. There's flight in 4 different groups of animals. You have flight flight in insects, flight in birds, flight in bats, and flight in reptiles. And of course, all these flying reptiles are now extinct. But you have to evolve 4 times. Look at the size of the wings on these animals. So the interesting thing is there should be many transitional forms in the fossil record showing how this front appendage or front leg or whatever it was extends out and changes from walking on land to something that can flap and fly off. The problem with that is this transition process from the standpoint of survival of the fittest would give that animal no advantage. And as a matter of fact, it'd give it a huge disadvantage if it all of a sudden started developing a wing, but it couldn't fly yet. It would be great for predators. So that makes no sense based on their own theory. And you would see a lot of transitions leading up to this. Well, do you? As far as flight is concerned, there are some very big gaps in the record. The first evidence of flight in mammals, which of course is in bats, is in fully developed bats of the Eocene epoch. In other words, they appear totally as bats, ready to fly. Again, this is sudden complexity. There's gaps in the fossil record. It states creation, not evolution. Now, the rest of the time today, I'm going to talk about ape men. There's various links between apes and man that are proposed. We, of course, are Homo sapiens, and there's various different genus and species that they've given to these other ape men or apes that are in line to man. And I'm going to go through in detail most, or many of these anyway, and tell you what they really are from a creationist standpoint. And from a creationist standpoint, I think that's what they really are. First one is Ramapithecus. And if you're an evolutionist in the audience up to date with the literature, you'd be screaming right now and say, wait a minute, Ramapithecus is not an ape. And that's true. It isn't. It used to be, though. As a matter of fact, back in the 1980s, when I first started talking about this, Ramapithecus was in the line to man. Now it isn't. But Ramapithecus is like 12 to 14 million years ago, according to evolution. It supposedly was an ancestor to Australopithecus, that I'm going to talk about next. The other thing you got to keep in mind with a lot of this stuff is there's very little fossil evidence. They make a lot of assumptions on very little. And this is Ramapithecus right here. Primarily a jaw, teeth. You can see a complete orbit here, which makes it a primate, but there's not a lot there. But now, this is an extinct ape. Everyone agrees with that. And evolutionists believe now that this Ramapithecus is not a link to man anyway. It's actually, they propose it as a link to the orangutan. They still won't back off evolution, of course, but now it's not in the link to man. And it's been renamed Civipithecus. How about Australopithecus? Australopithecus gets a lot of press. This is Lucy. Lucy was dug up in Africa, and its most noted probably skeleton of Australopithecus. It's a pretty, there's about half the bones there, so there's a lot of the skeleton there to look at. It's long-armed, short-legged, which is typical for a knuckle walker. Interestingly enough, Leakey's first book, when he had an artist draw Australopithecus, he had him walking on four legs, which, by the way, even on the internet, I can't find a picture of, but I do have a picture of it because I have the book. And so he thought it was a knuckle walker at first, but now, of course, it's shown as walking totally upright. But its cranial capacity, which they look at a lot, what the brain, how large the brain is clearly within the apes. It isn't even close to humans, and it's right in the range for apes. Simply, Australopithecus is an extinct ape. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's an extinct ape. How about Homo habilis? Another, now they've jumped from Australopithecus to Homo. Of course, we're Homo sapiens, so this is kind of on line building up to us. Homo habilis, there's several skeletons that are placed, or several skulls anyway, that are placed in this category. It has a cranial capacity of less than half of humans, and that puts it in the ape category. Again, these animals are extinct apes. They're not humans. They're extinct apes. And why would that surprise anybody? It shouldn't surprise anybody, because the 5 apes that we have on the earth today, the chimp, gorilla, orang, there's samang, gibbon, all of those are in the endangered species list, and the people who are youngest in this audience, they'll probably all disappear from the wild in their lifetime. All of them will. So there should be no surprise that if we go back in the fossil record that there are extinct apes back there, just like there are extinct reptiles and there are extinct amphibians, there are extinct mammals. Why not extinct apes? That's what Australopithecus and Homo habilis are. A very famous one is Java man. Java man is a link composed of, as it's shown here, a skull fragment, a femur, which is the thigh bone, and a tooth. Those 3 things make up Java man. A couple things about it. This was back in the 1800s. A guy named Dubois dug this man up. And the human remains were found at the same level as their dig, but they just didn't tell anybody about that. And they proposed Java man. There was huge criticism that came out from the scientific community when this was brought forward. Huge. And so bad that Dubois took the fossils, locked them up, wouldn't let anybody see them for 30 years. Finally, when he was dying, and he knew his life was ending, he finally said, I think the skull's from a gibbon. Of the femur and tooth are probably from a man. They were found 50 feet away at the dig. They were found 50 feet away from the skull. So who knows what it is? But even the guy who dug it up didn't think it was a link to man. How about Piltdown man? Boy, if an evolutionist was here today, they'd be screaming now. Piltdown man is not a link at all. It was a fraud. Found early in the 1900s. It was made up of teeth, jaw, skull fragments, femur, and then it had an elephant bone bat found, which the elephant bone bat supposedly was a tool that this link was using. Just happened to die right next to his elephant bone bat. But they found when in the 1950s, when new testing came about, they took the bones they were trying to date them actually, and they found out that the bones were treated with iron salts to look like a fossil. They also found that the teeth had been filed down to make them look different. And this whole thing was a hoax. They weren't fossils at all. They treated them with iron salts just to make them look like a fossil. The interesting thing is that this fossil was in the British Museum as a link to man for many, many years. Also, I tried to find it last night, but I couldn't. many PhDs and master's degrees were awarded because of the study of Piltdown Man. It isn't a link. It isn't even a fossil. So I don't know what they did with all those, but so newer technology here showed that this was totally a hoax. But an artist depicted Piltdown Man. This is a drawing from the 1920s. And you can see, I mean, this is the artist's depiction of what this man looked like based on information that wasn't even true. So the depictions that you see are, you'll see, an artist will try to depict what that person looked like, when in fact, all they've got is bones, and how are they going to know? For instance, if you take artist depictions of Australopithecus, they're all over the board. These are 3 of them. They're all supposed to be Australopithecus. Well, they all look quite a bit different. But where the hair is, who knows? It's not fossilized. Or what the soft tissue looks like, it's not soft fossilized. What color is the animal? You don't know. I mean, it is total imagination. It's imagination of the artist, or it's imagination of the scientist who's directing the artist to make the drawing. But it's imagination. How about Nebraska Man? This was an artist's depiction of Nebraska Man. And you can see over here that here's Nebraska Man, here's a woman down here doing something with a tool, I guess, and he's walking by. He's got long hair, and you can see. And here it is a quotation. It says, a complete physical body with hair reconstructed from one tooth. This was all based on one tooth, Nebraska Man. They found out later, however, it was later found to be the tooth of an extinct pig. It wasn't a primate. It was an extinct pig. But they came up with this drawing that was published all over the world based on the single tooth. That single tooth was shown to be from a pig. Now, as it says here, is that artist's depiction or an artist's deception? You be the judge, I guess. Now, I'm going to finish off here with Neanderthal Man. Neanderthal Man, shortly after Darwin wrote Origin of Species, a skeleton in Neanderthal, was brought to a guy named Rudolf Virchow. Rudolf Virchow is the father of pathology. Most people identify him as the father of pathology, and pathologists, of course, determine what an animal, for instance, or a person died from. They're the ones that do the autopsies or the necropsies. And Virchow, who of course was well known, looked at this skeleton that they brought to him, and he stated that this is no link. This is no link at all. This is just simply a skeleton changed by disease. The disease that he diagnosed there was rickets, which is, of course, poor nutrition and a vitamin D deficiency, and that has an effect on the pathological changes are seen in bone and the development of bone. So Virchow said right away, well, this is modern man changed by disease. By the way, this is back in, over 100 years ago. More recently, this was, and of course, they didn't believe it. They just said, this is a link, and they named him Neanderthal Man. And there have been several skeletons of Neanderthal Man, or many actually, dug up since. More recently, this same conclusion, they went back and looked at this. One of the articles, I think it's in, I'm not sure which of these two journals it's in, but it says, was Virchow right? And that was the title of the article, and they concluded that he was. that these bones are, in fact, changed by disease, and they do have signs of rickets and arthritis. These, by the way, Nature and Science, are two of the most respected scientific journals in the world, Nature out of Great Britain and Science out of the United States. Now, kind of going on with this whole thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about chromosomes here. And from genetics, there's a difference between man and apes when you look at them genetically, if you look at their chromosomes. And actually, their chromosome numbers are different. Apes have 48 chromosomes, which is 24 pairs, and humans have 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes. So the numbers are a little different. It's interesting when you look at it, though, and I'm going to be talking like an evolutionist here in a second, but when you look at it, you see here, this is an ape chromosome that gives it 48, and actually they call them 2A and 2B. And if you fuse these two together here, you come up with chromosome 2, which is the human chromosome. So, proposed from the evolutionary standpoint anyway, that when you look at the genes, the proposal is that through evolution, these two pairs of chromosomes from apes, 2A and 2B, combined and fused somewhere back in history into one pair, which is now chromosome 2 in man. And thus, the 2N number in the line to man changed at some point from 48 to 46, which we all hear, we have 46. Now, this is was further confirmed through gene sequencing, and if you just take a look at this, and these kind of line up, and that even further confirmed that this had occurred in the past. So this is presented as strong evidence that evolution has occurred. Well, what does a creationist, how do they explain this? Well, back to the same thing I talked about last time, God's design. We know that the chromosomes are similar between apes and man. We know they're similar because chromosomes and the genes dictate similar structure and functions. And there's no doubt we are similar to apes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. No doubt. I'm not saying we're the same. I'm saying we're similar, and we are. And but the separation of chromosome number 2 in apes, from God's design standpoint, a creationist, demonstrates that man, although he's very similar to those apes in many structural and functional traits, he is in fact different and unique. Now, why is this important, and why do I bring this up? Well, scientists have recently now been able to collect DNA from the bone marrow of Neanderthal skeletons. Interesting. They have confirmed that Neanderthal, skeletons that they've checked anyway, has the same number of chromosomes, 46, as man. Same number. Rather than the 48 chromosomes of apes. In other words, their proposal is that these two chromosomes, 2A and 2B in apes, have fused in Neanderthal back at some time, and then that led up to humans. And this is presented as proof of evolution. Now, this is a quotation from an evolutionist here who has looked at this DNA sequencing in a Neanderthal skeleton, and it states, one of the most stunning stories in recent evolutionary genetics involves the finding that some of our ancestors occasionally interbred with the now extinct Homo neanderthalensis, perhaps some 100,000 years ago. That's where Neanderthal dates back to. And this occurred in the Middle East. And as a result, modern Europeans and Asians have a genome comprised of between 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. It's interesting. Not only do the chromosomes, they state in their articles that not only do the chromosomes of Neanderthal appear the same as human, but the sequences of parts of their genes are identical, and in their minds, this is irrefutable evidence that Neanderthal was linked to man. Now, this is what's going on right now, and how do we answer this, in other words? It's interesting here that it says that it kind of came from Neanderthal as Europeans and Asians, when I thought our roots trace back to Africa. But anyway, now, how do we answer this? Interesting, creationists have presented Neanderthal as fully human for decades. I mean, if you go back and look at creationist literature back 30, 40 years ago, Neanderthal is presented as fully human. And this is strong evidence. I think they just proved it. I think they proved Neanderthal is fully human. It's not a link at all. Neanderthal is human. And if you, Neanderthal skeletons not only have 46 chromosomes, which is the same as us, but they also have gene sequencing that they've done now, gene sequencing that's in common with those modern groups of descendants, the Europeans and Asians, who are from the same geographical locations in which their remains are being found, Europe and Asia. So the descendants are showing that they have genetic connections or a relationship back to Neanderthal. And it's in the same locations, Europe and Asia. It's exactly what a creationist would expect if Neanderthal is, in fact, and I believe he is, a fully man. So Neanderthal's man, he's Homo sapiens, same as us. People in these locations did not, as the evolutionists suggest, have sexual relations or sexual intercourse with another species, Homo neanderthalensis, as it's called, and then have offspring from that. Neanderthals are fully human. They were isolated genetically. We go back to geographical isolation, and that's exactly what happened to these people. And that, of course, occurred, as it did with many populations of people, after the time of the flood. It makes total sense, and it lines up totally with what the Bible will teach. You might look at this chart and say, which is Neanderthal man here? Or is there one there, or is there two? Three, all four Neanderthal man? Kind of interesting. This happens to be an artist's depiction of a Neanderthal man right there. This guy here, Australia, is an Aborigine. Bolivian Andes Mountains. Eskimo from the Arctic. It just shows you the genetic variation between people, and this demonstrates that. Neanderthal doesn't look all that much different. If these four guys were sitting around a table, you'd probably, and they were all dressed the same, you'd probably be pretty hard pressed to pick out the guy that was supposedly Homo neanderthalensis. And this, this skeleton, which he's reproduced him, is from Asia and from the area of Siberia. So, Neanderthal is modern man. Look at this guy here. I think I've seen guys like this in the Boundary Waters, actually. Don't laugh. To some people, he may be more attractive than a lot of us in the room here. But just summing up, though, Australopithecus and all of the information, they're apes. And the bottom line here is they weren't created in the image of God. But this particular person, Neanderthal, all evidence points to the fact that he was created in the image of God, no different than you were or I was. So let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time, and we thank you, Lord, for your word. And as we look into science, we just realize how lost those people who believe in evolution really are. And we pray, Lord, that we'll be able to reach out to them with some of the criticisms of their own theory and try to reach them, but most importantly, reach them with the gospel that Jesus Christ came to this earth and died on the cross for them as well as us, and through his death they can have eternal life. We just pray that we'll have the boldness to reach out to people that oppose us as creationists. We thank you for this time and pray that you'll be with Pastor in the next hour as he presents a message. We ask and pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.